Perhaps first we should play social bingo. Every time you hear the word social, yell out bingo. See how many we'll get today. Seems to happen quite a lot. Thank you for having me here today. Personally, I have a background in philosophy, and somehow I found myself working in Australia on stuff that matters, and that is really remarkable. So happy to talk a bit more about that afterwards at lunch as well. I want to focus this 10 minutes on valuing the things that matter, valuing what matters. I will share with you briefly what Social Ventures Australia does.
They just bingoed you.
It's going to be a lot, guys. It could take up half of this talk. So I'll tell you a little about what Social Ventures Australia does. I will also then get into social value principles and how that applies to social return on investment. Maybe we'll stop at 5. We're already at 4. So Social Ventures Australia, that was only 1 minute. We started in 2002, and the intent with Social Ventures Australia is to improve the lives of people in need in Australia. There's actually a lot of terrible stuff that still happens in Australia. People do need support. And although there's money sloshing around in Australia, it's often not used to the best effect. So the intent from Social Ventures Australia is that we try to get better funding, more effective funding, to do better stuff, to create a reduction in disadvantage. And we do this through providing funding. So over the last 13 years, we've given in the vicinity of $50 million to organisations in Australia to be able to support different social causes. We have also started impact investing. So that's where we want to seek a financial return and a social return. So you may have heard about some different mechanisms, tools such as social impact bonds. The idea is that you create a social outcome and then there's a payment that's associated with that to an investor. So that's an emerging asset class in Australia. It's in its infancy, but it's starting. And we also provide advice. What we found is that there's lots of money already in the system in Australia, but often it's trying to work out what to do with that money and whether it's having a good impact or not, having a good effect or not. So that's what we do. And we do that by partnering with and working with different organisations on the ground, be it investors or non-profit organisations or social enterprises or businesses. We learn and get practical knowledge about this advantage. So we're looking at that juncture between the policy people, those who hold the purse strings, right in the middle, trying to understand what's really going on. We have to have great people and we need to be financially sustainable. And that's a really important pragmatic point. When we're talking about our own lives personally and the organisations that we work in, we need to make sure that people are happy and doing awesome stuff, as well as finding the right financial model, business model that we can be sustainable. That's all I wanted to talk about with Social Ventures Australia. There's loads of information out there in cyberspace about SVA. Again, happy to talk about that a bit later. But what I want to do focus on is how the philosophy behind social value principles can be applied to Social Ventures Australia. We've got the 20 socials already, by the way. And this ties into the discussion that you've been having yesterday and already this morning with Ava around evidence and how we are able to make the judgments about evidence and what's going to be appropriate. Now, I really like the phrase here that we've got to think about appropriate professional judgments. Someone needs to make a call about what is happening or not, and we need to be able to use that evidence to be able to inform whether we make a different investment or whether we are able to change what's happening in a program. So we need some way of guiding our decision-making processes. And what I thought would be helpful today is to share with you the principles behind social value, because this is a movement that started in the UK, in the States in the late 90s, picked up momentum in the UK and Europe more generally from 2003 to 2007, and in the last 10 years doing a lot of this in Australia as well. Now, I find that this is really helpful to be able to think about your own life as well as the organisations that you work with, even if it is a big corporate, even if it is an international charity. So there's no right answer. We need to find a way of making professional judgments. through the social value principles. Most of the rest of the pages I'm going to have up now are pictures. It is Sunday morning, trying to tone down the tempo a little, see how we go. The first principle about social value is to involve stakeholders. This is important. This is about power and accountability. Often we might think that we're the smartest people in the room, and we can come up with answers, and we can make a judgment about what's changing or not. But we need to hear the voice of the people who are actually experiencing that change. So it means that we can't just sit at a computer and write down what we think. We need to be able to go out there and hear the voice of those who are actually changing, regardless of where they are, and find ways of incorporating that into program design and delivery. So we need to be able to involve our stakeholders, a principle behind social value. We need to understand what changes. Now this can take different forms. This can take different forms through program logic or theory of change. Some of you may have heard those terms before. The essence of it is to be able to get very clear about how your activities result in change. And that can be incredibly complex and interesting. People are dynamic and fascinating things, by definition. We need to try to work out how what we do changes them and to understand all the other contributing factors to that. So we need to be able to understand what changes. This image here is to show that there's potentially something which is short-term and positive. You turn on a tap, you get water. Yay, we're lucky. It's awesome. We also have, on the other side, with the flood, an unintended negative consequence. So we need to be able to understand things which are positive, possibly short or long-term. We need to understand the things that are intended, unintended, and negative, perhaps. So it's not just about the happy stories that we think are going to come through, but to be able to articulate very clearly, tell that story about what changes. Positive, negative, intended, unintended, short and long term. Third principle is about valuing what matters. And here included the money and the heart. A juxtaposition, a paradox, if you please, but I think it's an important one that in our society we account for cash. We have systems to be able to account for profit and loss for a business. We have systems to be able to understand the balance sheet of an organisation, how much you have in your assets and liabilities. But we don't account for value. And so the intent behind this principle is to find a way of valuing the things that matter to the people who have changed right around the world. How important are the connections that we make? How important is to improve a young person's life so that they're healthy? Let's put a value on that using approximations, financial proxies, so it can be used in the same way that cash is used to be able to help inform and make decisions. So a controversial principle, what's the value of life? What's the value of confidence? What's the value of community connectedness? But important, because money isn't the only thing that we should be valuing. We should be valuing the changes that matter most. Fourth principle, only include what is material. Very exciting principle. Materiality. Anyone who's an accountant in the room would get very excited by recognising that materiality is all about relevance and significance. You don't want to include everything in your set of accounts. You only want to include what's relevant and what's significant. And that's true about how you're going to present information to your organisation about making change or about making a decision yourselves about who to invest in. So what's relevant, what's significant? Hence the golden egg. Out of all the eggs out there, what's the most relevant and significant thing? Is it the golden egg? Or is it all the white eggs? Take into account who the stakeholder may be. It might be someone who's hungry, or someone who might be cynical, recognising our biases around different evidence and things that are presented. So take that into account, but try to include what's material. The fifth principle, do not overclaim. This is rampant in the charity, social enterprise sector and business sector and government sector. Everyone thinks that what they do is awesome and it has the biggest impact imaginable. This principle is important so that we have that reality check. So if we say we went fishing and we caught a fish that was that big, we actually know it's really that big. We have to ask questions around the counterfactual. What would have happened anyway? If we're making this investment, is it worthwhile? Because actually it would have happened anyway if we wouldn't have made investments. So why are we investing in the first place? We need to recognise who else contributed to that change as well. We need to understand how long the change may last for based on our investment. There's some of the questions that we ask about not overclaiming. Okay, so it's 5 of the principles. There are 7. 7 is a lucky number. 7 is a good number, so there's only 2 more. Be transparent. Now, through all the different talks and presenting evidence and what we've been hearing about over the last day, really need to be clear about how you came to those judgments. You're making a professional judgment, but what's the bias in that? Can you validate what you've done? If someone did that study again or that thinking again, would they come up with a similar result? So you just need to be transparent. Science isn't exact. Science is a degenerative process by its nature where you put up a hypothesis and people try to destroy that over time. The same logic. We hold ourselves up to very high standards in the social space or in the charity space. The same logic applies here. Be transparent. Because you've just got an idea, a hypothesis. We need to be able to understand and test that over time, and we'll get better with that over time. Final principle is verifying the result. You might come up with all these great judgments and be transparent, but you need to test that with someone. Hopefully the stakeholders who are experiencing that change. Maybe the policymakers. It may be other stakeholder groups. Or it may be through a set of experts that do this stuff regularly. And that's what we're attempting to do through a couple of the movements I'm a part of that I'll speak about shortly. Trying to create that this is a profession. This isn't just here's an idea about a study, but we're actually building up that expertise about social value principles and how they're applied. For those of you who prefer words to pictures, they're all here, the 7 principles. The first 5 relate to the analysis. The final 2 relate to reporting. And they need to be thought about all together. You can't think about them individually. Just want to finish off on sharing that this used to be known as the social return on investment principles, but now they're referred to as social value principles, which is important. It's an amalgamation of a couple of different networks around the world to create Social Value International. And our intent is to be able to change how we account for value. So instead of accounting just for cash in our society, we'll be able to account for value. We can get better in organisations, in governments, and in our own lives about trying to account for the stuff that really matters. So that one of the international movements, Social Value International, and the local chapter of that is SIMNA, Social Value Measurement Network in Australia. My pause there. Thank you very much, and looking forward to speaking to some of you soon.